Thank you. I want to dig a little bit deeper on this because you're absolutely right. We need, in my opinion, to restore the full strength of the Federal Voting Rights Act. There's a lot that can and should be done, not just in terms of elections administration with respect to voting rights, but the protection of voters themselves. People should be able to vote free of any harassment, intimidation, obstacles, et cetera. And part of what works against that is, again, rooted in white supremacy, this big lie. We all sat through the impeachment trial, and the results notwithstanding, can't help but be moved by the evidence presented by the House managers. Again, how President Trump's big lie about voter fraud radicalized so many of his supporters. Now, I was struck by a February 19th opinion piece in the Washington Post by Jim Sciutto about the parallels between the Capitol insurrectionists and foreign terrorist organizations that respectfully ask be inserted into the record, Mr. Chairman. In it, Jim Sciutto writes, and I'll quote, "Domestic radicalism has deep parallels to jihadist terrorism. Both movements are driven by alienation from the political system and a resulting breakdown in social norms. For some groups and individuals, this breakdown leads to violence they see as justified to achieve political ends." End quote. Now, as we all know, the definition of terrorism is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation in pursuit of political ends. President Trump's political end was clear: stopping the certification of the 2020 election at the Capitol on January 6th. One could argue that right-wing groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers have acted like terrorist cells, communicating with one another, training together, and preparing for the moment they are activated for their mission. Indeed, President Trump instructed the Proud Boys on national television to stand back and stand by. And then he summoned them to the Capitol on January 6th as Congress was meeting to certify the election. What happened on January 6th was not a property crime, was not vandalism in reference to a question you were asked earlier. Judge Garland, as we sit here in the United States Capitol surrounded by National Guard troops and barbed wire, how will you bring the full resources of the Justice Department to bear on white supremacist organizations that pose an ongoing threat to not just our safety and not just the safety of this Capitol building, but to our fundamental democracy for which it stands?
I couldn't agree more that extremist groups, and particularly white supremacist groups, do pose a fundamental threat to our democracy, and they have posed that threat throughout our history. And as I recounted, that was the reason the Justice Department was originally established, to fight the first incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan. The best that I can do is, as I said, my first priority will be to have a briefing on where we are, if I'm confirmed, with the investigations, which from the outside appear quite vigorous and nationwide, and to find out what additional resources we need. But that is just a focus on what happened in the Capitol. We also have to have a focus on what is happening all over the country and on where this could spread and where this came from. And that does require a lot of resources. I am very pleased to have read that the director of the FBI believes that this kind of extremism is the most dangerous threat to the country, and that's where he's putting FBI resources. And that is where I would put Justice Department resources. And we need very much to make sure that that's the case. I do want to be careful that we also always worry about the foreign threat, because it is always with us, and the fact that nothing has happened recently doesn't mean it could not happen tomorrow. So from whichever direction, inside, outside, right, left, doesn't matter, an attack on our institutions of democracy and of our ability to go forward with our daily lives in safety has to be stopped. And that we need it all, it's a government-wide, but also a Justice Department-wide obligation.